Untold Stories in Learning and Development is an all-new podcast shining a light on the learning professionals you haven't heard of. Hosted by Chief Learning Strategist at Easy Generator, Casper Spiro, each episode introduces a new learning professional to explore how they're making waves in the industry in their own ways. Join us for a new story every week.
Yes, and good day. This is Casper Spiro with episode 4 of the podcast Untold Stories in Learning and Development. And today we have Laurie Niles as a guest. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So yeah, just to jump in, so maybe you can introduce yourself and tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Certainly. So Laurie Niles-Hoffman, I'm an EdTech strategist living in Toronto, Canada. We have snow today and it's March. And I help companies with their EdTech transformations.
Okay, and uh, so can you tell me, so why are you working in learning and development? What is the trigger there?
I've always loved learning. I've always loved, even being in school and university and studying. But most importantly, I've always been fascinated at the impact that learning can have on somebody's career, no matter what their beginnings were, no matter where they started. Learning opens up opportunities, and that access to information and experience really can change a person's life trajectory. And that's what I'm fascinated by.
Okay, and then just out of curiosity, because if you think about learning, you can go into education, but you chose for more like learning in a corporate environment. Is there a specific reason for that?
I think because I'd done my time in higher ed, and I found it a bit confining. I found that it catered to, well, but particularly the system that I came from here in Canada. It catered to people who were able to access it. It wasn't open to all. And the fact is, when you go into corporate, everybody or most people to some extent work in some way, shape, or form, and so there's different opportunities.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And can you describe, because most people don't land their first job in learning directly, so there's a whole journey usually. Can you describe your journey into where you are today?
Absolutely. So my journey started a long time ago. This would be going back to 1996. And I decided when I graduated, I wanted to go back to Poland, which is where my mother and my grandmother are from. And I have family there. That was my big ambition at the time. Everybody was going to Japan and earning lots of money. Spoiler alert, you don't earn money teaching in Poland. So I went there to be an English teacher, and I loved it. I positively loved it. And I was there for about 2 years. And when I came back, I had absolutely no money. And I started working in a call center for a bank, and then teaching high school during the day. And it was while I was working at the bank that I started to see some of the gaps that they had in training and education. And I started putting my hand up for that stuff. And eventually they put me into their learning and development
Okay.
department.
And what kind of study did you do before that? What was your background?
My degree was English literature.
In English literature. Okay.
Yeah, so nothing to do with this. I sort of fell into it, but I was very lucky when I worked at that bank. It was BMO, Banque de Montréal, and it was an excellent experience where they really taught me about, at the time we call it instructional design. So I really got a good education and background in that foundation. They really helped me with that. And I worked my way up, and eventually I started gravitating more towards the EdTech implementations. So implementing LMSs and then eventually LXPs at a global scale for companies with like 100,000 people. So I really started to get into that side, and I loved it.
And you decided to do that with your own company. So when did that start up?
Yeah, so that started. I really left to go on my own. It would be around 2016, and at the time I was working for KPMG, and I just found that I wanted to give my own advice. I wasn't necessarily in agreement with, not that they do bad work, but just I was seeing things from a different perspective, and so I resigned, and that was when I started really working with companies on a sort of short term targeted basis on helping helping them stand up their EdTech and their ecosystems and what they are trying to do. And then I was fortunate enough to meet my business partner, NilesNolen, in 2018. And it was at that time that we formed NilesNolen, and now we do what we do.
Okay. And is it because you were talking about learning technology, learning ecosystem? So is it more like the technical side of things that you advise on, or is it also other
It's
elements of learning?
it's really the entire package. So what we find is companies typically come to us because either they've purchased an LMS or an LXP and they're not getting engagement. And that's when they usually come to us. It's not the ideal time. Ideally, what we want to do is, and what we like to do is we work with companies on all aspects of the transformation. So it's not just buying the race car and saying, hey, I'm just going to drive it. It's all the things around it. Stakeholder management. How are you going to do a content strategy? How are you going to look at the skills across your organization and where you have gaps and target those specifically? How are you going to use data? How is the data going to flow internally in your ecosystem, and how can you use it to make better decisions? How do you become a strategic advisor rather than an order taker? And that means a whole new way of working. So there's lots of things around it that we work with companies on, and it's really that the tech is the engine, but it's all of the things are around it.
As far as goes the mindset of people and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Okay. And so sometimes you hear that the world of learning and the learning departments is not the most innovative side of companies. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, you work on where change is happening there.
Mm-hmm.
So you would be great to observe that. Do you think that is the world changing? Is it like on a standstill? Do you think there are like lots of new developments? How do you look at that?
So it's interesting. There are lots of new developments, mostly because with the transition to digital with COVID, we saw an influx of investment in edtech, which is a good thing. But we also saw a lot of people entering the market very, very quickly because they see opportunities. And I don't want to deny them that, but they are not necessarily coming from a place of good learning, and from a place where they really understand how corporate L&D operates or how people learn. So there. Now that said, there are some really good pockets of innovation that we want to keep it. We want to keep our eye on, but the playing field is certainly not level. But I also think too, in our rush to go digital with L&D, we did a lot of really good things, and then. But I did see a lot of companies where they just tried to perpetuate the status quo. So, like if they had a 4-hour leadership course, they just automatically did the 4-hour leadership course, but in Adobe Connect. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, I get why you're clinging to the past, but it's about shifting that mindset. So I think now we're starting to come out of that reactive mode. And in the past 6 months, now I'm starting to see people are realizing that even when we return to office, that this idea of what's hybrid learning and what digital learning really can be, because we also were challenged by what other industries were doing for digital that and we ourselves have to keep up with that, and we haven't. So there's a lot of pressures, but I am hopeful.
Okay. But I also hear you say it's not just e-learning, it's a hybrid form. So you're looking to all kind of blended modes where you combine it with instructor-led training, face-to-face training, and an online component.
Absolutely, but even more so than that, it's combining it with things like talent marketplaces are new. They're not new, but those are really exploding, and I think for very good reason. And I endorse them highly. Where it's not just about having the learning, you do it in digital, whatever format, and then you go to a face to face. But those experiences in the talent marketplace, where you actually go for 6 weeks on a project, and you're honing those skills, and there's feedback loops embedded in that, and you're actually doing and practicing what it is that you're learning. That to me is a huge part of the hybrid learning.
Okay. And that is basically what your work is, to enable that and to help company transform into that direction.
Exactly. We
Okay.
try.
I understand. I understand what you're doing. And what would be the most important lessons that you learned along this journey?
That's an interesting one. I think for me, the most important lesson I've learned is, to from a personal perspective, it's okay not to fit, right? And not always accept the status quo. So for me, it took me a long time, but when I went independent, it was about looking for the right garden. I was always, the right flower in the wrong garden, and it became a case of how do I attract or work with the people that I want to work with. And to me, I think that's really important to find your purpose. And I know. That's just from a very personal perspective. From a wider, more concrete perspective, I'd say the thing that I've learned is, EdTech or technology is never the answer. It's part of the solution, but you can have the best possible solution ever. But if you're not preparing for how it's going to work and operate, it's just going to sit there and rust.
Okay, I think yeah, that is very true. So yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, and just out of curiosity, maybe a bit sideways, but I had my own small company for a while, just
Yes.
advising companies,
Yeah.
a bit from the same perspective. So just do and with what you want to do without any limitation. Don't you find it hard to get into the right corporates because you have to compete with the bigger consultancy firms?
Uh, yes and no. So I'm very fortunate that I have a tenacious business partner, Amanda Nolan, in Spain, and I like to refer to her as a tsunami in heels. She's very good at making connections, and getting into those places. I think the other key has been, when I left KPMG, I really took the time to craft my thoughts and put them out there without filters. And that's almost been a lead qualifier in a lot of sense, because if a CLO reads what I'm writing, it's pretty obvious where I'm coming from and the way that I position things, and what on like I do a lot of honesty, and I try to be pretty much a straight shooter. If they don't like that, they won't contact me.
Mhm.
But the ones who are looking for that will. And I find also too, and a little secret is, we work at enterprise level. So we typically work with companies that have got, 50,000 or more employees. They will have the big four in there. They already have their consultants, but a lot of times they engage us to fly under the radar, to look at, what's going on and get a second perspective. That's not to say that the big four aren't valuable. They have wealths of experience, but we're very, very niche and targeted in what we do.
Yeah, yeah. So you have
Um,
your specific proposal, your specific way of looking
exactly.
at things, and they know that, so they will. That is also the benefit of being small.
Exactly. So typically by the time they've contacted us, they know what we're about, or we've been referred to. We don't do any real marketing. The
Yeah,
referral system
most
works.
most the word marketing is probably the main thing for getting new customers
Exactly.
in. Okay, cool. Okay, that was just a personal
Mhm.
curiosity. Okay, and then if we look at corporate learning in general and how that develops, so what do you think is the greatest milestone so far for corporate learning? So what is the biggest achievement?
The biggest achievement, really, it sounds very obvious, but for me, it's about going digital. And this was such a radical shift, and I'm old enough, I hate to say it, to remember it. I remember, putting learning on CD-ROMs. And it was amazing because at the time, the company, I was also at a financial institution at a bank, and they were so paranoid about a CD-ROM, and we had to password protect it, in case somebody left the CD-ROM on a subway or someone else picked it up, and a competitor picked it, got it. And I remember laughing, thinking we printed everything before, and
Yeah.
so like we had binders and books of stuff, and I mean, you didn't need a password for that. But going into digital, and that change, and what we tried to do, when you look at those early efforts into digital and how far we've come, it's really quite remarkable. It used to be just basically a textbook on a that you downloaded, right, and you just read on a screen. But now it's so radically different, and I think that that's amazing. And how we think about the digital experience, and what that means, and how people work. Now I think we're at an intersection where we have to think about how our technology integrates with the work technology, and how we blend those two together. So the ed tech, how it
So that
interacts
would
with.
be the next challenge for learning. to make that connection.
Exactly.
And why do you say that? Because you want to include the learning in the flow of work, or is there another?
It's not so much that. It's about enabling the learning experiences and crafting them in a specific way. So an example I like to give is, say, for example, you've done level 4 Spanish, okay? And because you're learning a language on the side or, for your work. The next time you log into Excel, it says, "Hi, would you like to change your language settings to Spanish?" That to me is now embedding the learning in a very savvy way and embedding that practice in the way that people are working. So it's not so much learning in the flow of work, but it's also saying we're going to give you opportunity and time to practice skills that you're working on. That requires an entire
So
rethinking.
adjusting the work environment to make it suitable for learning. Is that what you are saying?
Exactly, and really thinking about, when somebody takes the time to learn something, because I don't believe that you can just learn alongside your job. Learning takes time, it takes effort, it takes concentration. It's there, but if we also to give people the opportunities to practice and their craft and to use it in ways that are meaningful and impactful, that to me is where we now have some magic happening there.
Okay, that's nice. Okay, so with that challenge, you also already set a bit of a direction of learning more integrated in that workplace. So is that also what you see as the biggest change that will happen between now and 5 years, or is there something else on your radar that will happen and change our environment?
In order for that to happen, SCORM has to be broken. SCORM is what's holding us back. So if we don't break SCORM, we're not going to get to that place. SCORM has its purpose, but if we don't solve for that, it becomes a problem because the data is housed on an LMS and it can only be housed there. And then you have all of these other systems that are generating other pieces of data that the LMS cannot interpret. And
Okay,
so
yeah,
we've got
just
our
for the people who are
sure.
not aware of that, so SCORM is a system to track and trace learning results. It dates
Correct,
back to
but
the 1990s, by the way, I think. But
it
it's still the
does.
main mechanism to track and trace results. And the key thing about SCORM is that it can only track and trace learning efforts within an LMS, within a learning management system. There's a new version of SCORM called xAPI, which is much more open and it allows you to track and trace from anywhere. So if you have
Yes,
like different places where you learn, you can still track and trace in one database. That's
correct.
what you're referring to. And
Exactly. That's what I'm referring to. But exactly. But the thing with XAPI that I don't think we've quite crafted is it can take a lot of effort to set that up for XAPI, and it's a specific way of publishing. Even though some of the rapid authoring tools will publish right to XAPI, you still have to have the backend operating to accept that information. So the example I like to give is if I go on Squarespace, okay, I have a blog, I publish my blog. All I do is write the content. If I look at the back-end data analytics that I get from Squarespace without ever having to do anything to it, I get probably 90% of the same data that I do with xAPI without having to do any code whatsoever or having to generate anywhere. I can also, that data automatically flows to my CRM, my customer system. So, and I don't need to do anything with it other than set up the connector, the API in. That's where I think we need to go because there's so much tax right now on the average learning developer. They need to know storyline. They need to know how to do a needs analysis, or they need to know now xAPI. They need to know how to work with data. That's a lot. So how do we make that easier and seamless?
okay, I understand that. So for if I look at how from my perspective, so with for example with easy generator,
Yep.
we use xAPI as the default mechanism to track and trace results.
Excellent.
So you don't have to code anything. But then
Hmm.
indeed it's stored in either a learning management system or a learning record store.
Right.
But then you need to have, of course, the facilities to get the information out of there. So you need to know a
Exactly.
bit about BI tools and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So is there a way that, for example, I don't have to do anything for that final step you're talking about for it to go into my CRM? All I do is set up the API. And which is very easy. It's when I say set up the API, I'm not talking about any special
Yeah.
coding. I'm going into my settings and just going click, click. That's setting it
Okay.
up.
And Is that also connected to what you said to the challenge to actually connect the learning to the workplace? That you want to
Yes.
connect the learning data to the workplace data, so you can actually
Uh,
have performance data combined with learning data. Is it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And how do we mesh the two? How do we marry them? Because that's where we start to now see in real time not only impact of learning, but we can also look at workplace performance and say where do we need learning?
Yeah. Interesting enough, I had a conversation with the learning manager of Rico earlier this week, and he told me
Mm,
they did exactly that. They combined the learning data with the performance data. The first thing they found, they were overtraining people.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they
Oh,
actually had
absolutely.
to diminish the training, and they actually got an improvement in performance. So that was really interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Fascinating.
Okay. Yeah, but that goes beyond the default usage of xAPI, which is of course meant to track and trace learning results. But
Mhm.
then the power of that comes to be able to combine it with other data, and then analyze that and get new insights. So that's basically what the holy grail is, and the big change for 5 years.
That's what I hope. That is sincerely what I
Okay,
hope.
would be interesting to see where we are, and because just to be like advocate of the devil, so xAPI was launched in 2013. We're now living in 2022,
Yep.
and it's only like this much of the learning tracking and tracing done through that. Do you think that the learning world is ready for it?
No, I don't. And that's not because I'm downplaying any of the intelligence or savviness of our industry. It's because they're overtaxed. And as I was saying before, all the things that a learning professional is expected to know. I mean, I even now see job postings that not only are you in charge of learning, you're now in charge of diversity and inclusion. And it's like, okay, hold on. And some of them even now say you're in charge of wellness. It's so much that we're putting into that bucket, and so I think it's a capacity issue. That's why I think the more that we can make it seamless, that at least takes off some of the burden. But if we want to be serious about this, we have to put effort into it. And if companies fail to realize, like right now, the average life of a technical skill is 2.5 years. If you're a company, say, that operating in an IT space or in anything technical, you should be afraid by that. If you're not empowering and giving the investment into your L&D team to be able to upskill your people, you can't continue to rely on the fact that these people would just be available on the market. They're not. So you
Yep.
have to look at your own workforce. It's a business
Yep.
problem to solve.
I totally get that. Yeah, having the right workforce and indeed skilling that workforce and making sure it has the skills you need. That one of the key reasons, or one of the key requirements to be successful, of course, as a company.
I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Okay. So, yeah, I think that sort of captures your view on corporate learning. Is there something I missed out on? Something else that you want to share with us if you look at the world of corporate learning that we should discuss?
I think we've covered it.
Okay, cool. Then, just as we always end the podcast with a bit of knowledge sharing. So,
Hmm.
who is your ultimate learning hero that people should look into?
There's a lot of them. I would say, though, if I really think of the ultimate learning here, to me, it's the person on the other end of the screen who is really deep upskilling to change careers. I find those people fascinating. People who are, saying, I'm in this industry and I want to move to another one. Like, and they put the time in. To me, that's the real hero. They're
Okay.
amazing. But if I had to say, like the people who I really am fascinated with, they're Todd Tauber is probably one of the big ones. He's at degree, really fascinating. Trish Uhl, it's UHL is her surname. Oh, follow her on Twitter. She is absolutely, I mean, I have such a brain crush on all the things that she does. Josh Novell is another interesting person at Warner Music. He's doing incredible things by bringing learning experiences into work. So those are
Have
probably, I
Have
know
you
it's
worked with any of them, or do you know of their work?
I know them personally. I've not worked personally with Trish, but I've been at conferences with her, and I always make a point to go to her sessions. Todd Tauber, we've done casual like riffing on things, so it's work with a lowercase w, and with Josh it would be the same. We often will connect and talk about the problems he's trying to solve, and I'm just super impressed. I don't think I could do, when you say, have I worked with them? I don't know if I could, because these are just people who are just so super smart. I don't know if I have anything to add other than to absorb.
Okay. Yeah, by the way, we'll make sure that with the podcast, we also share this information in writing with a link where you can read more about these people. So thank you. And is there, talking about links, something, a book, a blog, a podcast people should read or follow that you think that will help you to the next level?
Yeah, so the book that I always refer people to is actually not an L&D book. It's nothing. It's I because there's a lot out there, but the book that I actually really love is called Educated, by a woman, Tara Westover. And it's her journey from, she grew up in a very rural environment and she wasn't given any formal education. She was homeschooled. And she ends up basically getting a PhD in, I believe it's Cambridge or Oxford. And it's her journey as to how education and access to information changed her mindset and opened up her potential. And I find it just a very fascinating look, because to me, it speaks back to what I'm always interested in, which is what learning can do for people. It's not just, to help them succeed in their careers, but what does it actually mean? And what does opportunity mean?
So that is more like a motivational book that you
Yeah.
really see the value of learning.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting because most people actually refer back to one of the learning leaders who had a new insight in learning. So that's
Well,
nice.
there's a lot out
And
there. I
for
mean,
me, for me, that's a new book. That's really interesting. So I haven't heard of that yet. So I will definitely dive into that. Okay, thank you. And then the last question is, who should I talk to next? Who do you think I should interview that will give me new insights where I
I
can learn
think
from?
I'm going to suggest another fellow Canadian. Well, she lives in Calgary, and it's Dr. Stella Lee. And I find her absolutely fascinating. She's has her doctorate in EdTech, and she is an encyclopedia for everything you possibly need to know. But what I also love about her is she's just a true Renaissance person. She's a phenomenal artist. Every time I see her visuals and what she creates, I'm just so amazed. She's multilingual. She's just a really interesting person and a fantastic chef. So there's lots to talk about with her, in addition to her knowledge about EdTech.
That sounds exciting. I will definitely reach out to her. Thank you for that. So, any last words from your side to wrap this up?
Just a huge thank you. I enjoy all of our conversations, Casper, and it's wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah, well, thank you for being on this podcast. I really enjoyed it as well, and I think got a couple of new insights and some things I need to follow up on, both on the people side. I didn't know everybody, and on the book. So, thank you for that. And
This podcast is brought to you by Easy Generator, an easy-to-use authoring tool for subject matter experts. At Easy Generator, we want to empower employees in the business to capture and share their knowledge. How do we do it? By designing an intuitive and simple platform that anyone can use to create learning content for their organizations. To learn more, visit us at easygenerator.com.